There are certain interviews in this podcast that thrill me. All of them excite me. But today's guest absolutely thrills me. Some of the work that he's done, I so resonate with and I so admire. And I want to really invite you to listen to what I believe could be a completely new paradigm for the way the world makes decisions and the way we, from a disconnected place, from a place of argumentation, come together to find solutions that unify us in a completely different way. My guest today is Dr. Louis Rosenberg, and he's the founder of Unanimous AI. And he founded the company to pursue his interests in collaborative systems, artificial intelligence, and human-computer interaction. Rosenberg attended Stanford University, where he earned his bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees. His doctoral work focused on robotics, virtual reality, and human-computer systems. While working as a graduate researcher at the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory, Armstrong Labs, in early 1990s, Rosenberg created the Virtual Fixtures platform, the first immersive augmented reality system ever built. You can tell he's a Stanford guy, okay? But that's where, let me continue. Rosenberg then founded Immersion Corporation to pursue virtual reality technologies. As CEO of Immersion, he brought the company public in 1999. Rosenberg also founded Microscribe LLC, maker of the world's first desktop 3D digitizer. The Microscribe 3D, which has been used in the production of countless feature films, including Shrek, Ice Age, and A Bug's Life. Rosenberg also founded Outland Research, a developer of advanced interfaces for mobile devices and the future of computing. He has also worked as a tenured professor at California Polytech State University, teaching engineering, design, and entrepreneurship. He has been awarded more than 300 patents worldwide for his technological efforts in virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and human-computer interaction. He currently lives in California with his wife and kids, and is a longtime vegan and friend of all animals, big and small. You absolutely must check out his TED Talk on the power of hive minds, and we will list that information below. Louis, it is an honor and a privilege to have you today on the podcast with us. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure. Before we get involved too much in the business side of everything and what you've done, I just want to give a chance to hold the space for people to get to know you a little bit. What was your favorite thing to do as a kid?
That's a great question. I just really like to create things. So when I was really little, I like to create things with blocks and Lego and erector sets and all that stuff. And then as I got older, I got very interested in computer programming, which is common these days, but back then in the 1980s, there weren't that many kids learning to program computers, but to me it was really, really interesting and a great way to create things and see the results very quickly.
How did you even find out about that? Because I know the 80s we were just starting all computers were really becoming, when I was growing up, I had a cousin who did computer programming for one of the big science companies in the world, but he was considered like a freak and like a weird person. But 1980s was a little different. But how did you get steered that direction?
Yeah, it's interesting. I just, I came across computers and it just fascinated me. And so I kind of sought it out, and, there were, my schools had, a couple of really simple computers that I would seek out. And then I begged my parents for a couple of years to get me a computer. and I was fortunate that they did. And it's because again, back then it was unusual.
Yeah.
And but I could just I saw something about it that struck me as so interesting and different that I really just wanted to teach myself what it was all about.
And so it was, at what age were you when that all started to happen? Was that high school, or was that junior high school? When did that all start?
Yeah, I was about 12 years old when I started getting interested in computers, and for me, in some sense, it was a little bit of an escape. So I'm dyslexic, and when I was young in elementary school, middle school, I did fine in school, but it was hard. It was hard, and the world didn't make a perfect amount of sense to me in terms of, when the world of symbols can switch around on you, and you see things different than other people. School can be hard, but for some reason, when I used computers, it was it made sense to me, and so in some sense, it was a reaction, I think, for myself to the fact that I was dyslexic. I wasn't built in a way that understood the standard world of symbols that most people deal with, and computer programming was different.
Fascinating. I mean, I love stories like that, when people take what the world would consider a disadvantage, and you even probably considered it a disadvantage, and recreate it so that find a way to use that situation to open up a world for you. So did you pretty much know the minute you sat down at a computer your life was going to be involved with computers? What was the connection that happened for you that made that reality the reality that brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, once I started programming computers, and I realized that I could teach myself how to do it, and I could just sit down and make something happen that was significant, just by myself in front of a keyboard, and that was really different than, say, school, where I was, I just found it more difficult to do really simple things like spelling, where it was. I knew that it was something that I was really interested in, and it's hard to know if I knew it was going to be something I did my whole life, because back then it wasn't something that lots of people were doing. So I think I did know that it was going to be significant to the whole world, computers and technology. But by the time that I was in high school, I got some jobs programming, and I knew that it was important to me. But it's hard to look back and know, did I think that it was going to, change my life the way it did, or change the whole world the way it did?
Yes.
I think it's always really hard to put yourself back in that time and place of the 80s and realize that there was no internet there. Everything was so different.
Yeah. And you left out a component, because you said, I didn't know that it was going to change my life or be a part of my life or change the world the way it did. But the component that is really happening right now is the way it affected your life is going to, in my way of thinking, is and already has affected the way it's affected the whole world. So your situation, fortunate for, I think, all of us, is that that's what opened up for you. But let me roll it back just one more time. When you were a kid, what did you think you were going to grow up to be?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to be either a scientist or an inventor or a technologist. So that was, my interest was science and technology, and computers was the thing that I was able, to have accessible to me as a kid. I think it would have been hard to be, start being a biologist as a kid,
Right, right.
or a chemist, but as a, starting to do, computer science as a kid, I could do that. And I think that's why I went that direction. And it was fun and it was interesting. And also it's also kid friendly in that, when I was in high school, I was programming video games and things that were fun, but also taught me a lot about how computers work.
Wow. So to all those parents out there that are listening whose kids are playing unbelievable amounts of computer games, I being one of those, what would you say to parents around their kids and the time that they're spending there? Because it seems like that whole thing really developed for you into opening up a new world. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think computer games are can be a really good inspiration for programmers. A lot of people who learn to program and who are passionate about computer programming get into it because computer games are fun. On the flip side, it is really easy for somebody to waste huge amounts of time playing computer games. And so I would certainly encourage people who have kids who are, spending lots and lots of time playing games to suggest, hey, maybe they think about creating their own games or learning about how to do that, because you can easily get lost spending just as much time doing that, but you're also learning things and developing, really how to think creatively.
I love that idea. So did you have in those days somebody who was a influential person that guided you in the process? Did your dad or your mom have that sort of lean on the world, or was there a teacher at school, or was there somebody, or did you just sort of figure that out on your own?
Yeah, I figured it out on my own. I didn't have, I didn't know anybody who was, computer programmer or have any engineers in my family. And so I definitely had to seek it out on my own. I do think that when people have somebody who can mentor them as a kid, it could make a really big difference. But again, back then there were so few people who were doing it that it wasn't as easy to find people to give guidance. And also that was back before the internet was a real thing. And so it was harder to find information, just find information. And so, it was back in the days when you'd go to a library to learn about stuff.
Or you usually open up the encyclopedia, right?
Yeah.
So I want to segue a little bit now, because that same spirit, it seems like, that drove you to learn that on your own, seems like it's driven you in some ways through your whole career. Because there would be a lot of people, I would think, who would have done one or two of the things that you've done and just put a feather in their cap and stopped. What gave you the spirit or the soul or the strength to just create these things, sell them, create them, sell them, and move on to do what you're doing now?
Yeah, I think it's curiosity and getting excited about new ideas and wanting to discover them or figure them out or see if they could work. And so a lot of most of the stuff that I've done, I got excited about it just because it seemed fun and interesting. And then as I dug into it, it became more interesting. And sometimes, I didn't even intend for them to become a business. But as I got into it, I realized that other people thought it was interesting as well.
Yeah.
And so I think those are those are the best things to pursue, things that you're pursuing because you would have done it anyway, just on your spare time. But as you get into it, you realize that there could be something significant there, and other people see the significance, and there are potential business opportunities that can keep it going.
So that happens, I'm sure, for a lot of people, but they may not have the connections to make those things realized. Where did your connections come from? Did they come from school? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I grew up in New York, on Long Island, and I had no connections with anybody in the field of technology. It was not a technology hotbed. I don't think I ever met an engineer while
Wow.
I was growing up. But when I went off to college, I was I kind of made the strange decision to leave the East Coast and go out to Silicon Valley and go to Stanford. And back then, that was a more unusual thing to do than today. But when I was when I was at Stanford, then I really did get exposed to the world of entrepreneurship and startups, and just the idea that you can start your own company, start from scratch, start in a garage, and it's it's not as crazy as it seems, and so that is definitely a result, I think, for me back then of being in a place like Stanford. Again, that was 30 years ago. Now, that kind of entrepreneurial spirit has permeated beyond schools like Stanford and MIT, and really become part of the general culture of most universities that have technology and engineering programs.
Of course. But so were you there right at the time that Silicon Valley was happening and tech was forming, or were you also a little early? Where did you find yourself in that? Were you in the hotbed of it?
So it's interesting, Silicon Valley goes in waves. And so there was certainly a wave that happened before I got there, which was the wave of building chips.
Yeah.
and that's why they call it Silicon Valley. And so the 70s and 80s was all about building silicon chips, and that really built up Silicon Valley. The next wave was really about software, and I think I got there kind of during that time, when there was a kind of a shift from a real hardware focus and chips to software focus, and also focus on products, technology products. And I founded my first company in 1993, which was Immersion, one of the early virtual reality companies. And again, back then, that was really the start of the world of virtual reality. But over the next 10 years in Silicon Valley, that's when things exploded with the internet bubble, and Silicon Valley really transformed during those years from, say, 93 to 2000. That was I think Silicon Valley became something even bigger than it ever imagined.
Yeah. I can only imagine creating something like a virtual reality product that nobody ever had experienced before. Did people think you were crazy? Did people like say, "Oh my God, this is fabulous"? Did people push it off at first, say this will never happen? What reality did you come into when you started doing that stuff?
Yeah, so the way I got interested in virtual reality and augmented reality was while I was in school. So I got interested in it as an undergraduate, and I decided to stay at Stanford and do my PhD. And I was fortunate enough to get a fellowship from the U.S. Air Force as a civilian. It was a civilian
Right.
fellowship to pursue the ideas I had around this technology area. And just as a step back, the thing that I realized when I was deciding to do graduate work was that my real interest was in the barrier, in the boundaries between technology and people. And so my whole career has really been how can we use technology to make people work better, perform better, become, how can we amplify human abilities using technology? And back in the late 80s and the early 90s is when these ideas of virtual reality just first started happening. And so for my doctoral work, I had this crazy idea that, what if you could have a virtual reality, but it wasn't stuck in a computer system. It was something that you could overlay on your view of the real world. Could you create these virtual objects that would be overlaid on your view of the real world and enhance your abilities? And that's what I did at the U.S. Air Force. And it ended up being really the first system that creates what people now call augmented reality. And so I was fortunate enough to spend a number of years working on what became this first augmented reality system. I realized it was fascinating and fun, and people would like it. It was one of those things where it was hard to explain, but if I just gave people a demo, they would get it instantly. And I was also very, very interested in virtual reality, but also in a particular area where I worked on how you could add the sense of touch and feel to virtual worlds. And again, it was one of these things where if you gave a demo to people, they would instantly get it. And so when I was working on my PhD work, the thing that I realized, and I was working with a lot of human subjects, and people would come in and try things and give me feedback. The feedback that everybody was giving was, this is a really cool experiment, but everybody's going to want this at some point, and that
Right.
was the motivation for me. That was the motivation for me to say, hey, when I finish my PhD, instead of going out and getting a job, why don't I try to start a company? Because people, if this was something that was commercially available, everybody would want it. Of course, there were barriers, which is that, back then computing power was much, much less, and these technologies were expensive. And so for me to create systems that created virtual reality or augmented reality systems, they were expensive back then. But the cost of computing was coming down, and back then, my view was that virtual reality, augmented reality would be in everybody's life, within 5 to 10 years, and it didn't happen that way. I mean, now we're 20 years later, and people are still saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes these technologies take longer than you expect. But it's not because people don't want them, and it's not because they're not powerful, but there are various other constraints, whether it's the cost or the usability that make these things take longer.
And so did that process of time frustrate you? Did you just adapt to it? Because it sounds like you already saw the reality. I'm like this a little bit. I'm a great starter. I already see what's going to happen, and sometimes the path to get there frustrates me because I already see it in my mind of what's going to happen. But it's just it's seemingly forever to get there, which isn't really forever. It's 20, 30 years. That's in the span of a world. That's nothing, right? But did it frustrate you?
So when you start a company, you're under pressure to make things happen faster rather than slower, but you can't make the world move at a different pace. Certainly not as a little startup. And so, for me, I saw the potential of virtual reality, and I also knew that people liked it because I had lots and lots of people who would try things, in the lab, and they would experience it, and I knew that at some point people would want it. I thought it would happen quickly. It didn't, mostly because of cost. But the thing about any startup is that you really have to adapt to what the market is telling you. And although I saw virtual reality as something that every person in the world would ultimately want to to have, available because of the cost constraints. And again, back then, to have a computer system that really made something realistic, instead of it costing, a couple $1,000s, it would cost $30,000.
Right.
And so we focused on the medical industry in the early years of virtual reality, on medical simulation. And so I spent a long time really focused on creating systems that would allow doctors to train on virtual reality simulations of medical procedures, rather than having to train on actual patients or train on animals, which were really the two ways they were doing it back then. And so there was, the company was successful. We were able to have a successful business in the virtual reality space starting in the 90s. The company went public in the late 90s. Company's still around today. It's still a public company, still doing work in the virtual reality space. But that was because there were opportunities for expensive systems for doing things like medical training, while the world was still reducing the cost of the components. And again, even today, if you went back 5 years, people would say, "Oh, the world's 1 year away from virtual reality being, in everybody's household," and it's still, it takes longer than people expect because of the cost and various other, constraints. But for me, I still really do believe that virtual reality and even more augmented reality are technologies that can enhance human experience and make people perform better and understand their world better by introducing technology into their natural experiences in creative and interesting ways.
Let me back up for a minute, because you're using a lot of terms that are familiar to me and you, but some people might be listening. I think everybody understands what virtual reality is. What is augmented reality?
So augmented reality is similar to virtual reality in that you're introducing things that are simulated into somebody's experience, but you're doing it in a way so that they still can see the real world. So they can see the real world all around them, and but
Quote,
you can introduce on top,
quote unquote, the real world, right?
right. You can see the physical world around you, and you're wearing, for example, glasses that can present graphics, but they're transmissive. You can see through them, and so you can see the real world. But then you can also have simulated things projected over the real world, and the idea being that you can introduce all kinds of really interesting information. And the most popular example of augmented reality in a small sense was a very popular game the last couple of years called Pokemon Go, which introduces Pokemon characters into the real world. You're not wearing glasses, you're just looking through your phone, but your phone becomes a little mirror on the world, and you can move it around and see characters. There's a number of additional games like that are going to come out within the next few months to next year. Microsoft is launching something called Minecraft, I think Minecraft Earth.
Wow.
That will be like Pokemon Go, but brings Minecraft into the physical world. The company that did Pokemon Go is also introducing a Harry Potter themed experience. And so these will be entertainment experiences around augmented reality that I think will help to drive the technology forward. But again, there's so many more interesting things that can be done than just for entertainment in terms of just giving people information about the world around them that can be an interesting and powerful enhancement to their lives. I mean, the thing is, it has to be has to be low cost, and it also has to just feel natural. It can't be this, awkward set of glasses that you're wearing. I mean, Google tried to launch, their Google Glass. That's now, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, and really interesting idea, but nobody wanted to wear them.
Yeah.
And it's these very human issues that are usually the biggest barriers, and it's about getting, having technologies that just feel natural. They don't feel like
not forced.
They don't feel forced.
Yeah. So this question keeps coming up in my mind, and I was trying to push it down but growing up in the 70s, when LSD and hallucinogenics and all that stuff was going on, it was this whole thing brought on by a drug-induced reality, or was it the step after a drug-induced reality? Once people saw that there was another reality, like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure there's a connection between people realizing that reality is malleable,
yeah,
and there are things that can be done pharmacologically, and there are also things that can be done technologically. And I think that I think virtual reality, which really just the earliest work started in the late 80s, and virtual reality had its first kind of big push in the early 90s, and then there was a lot of activity in the early 90s. People thought it was going to happen, and then it didn't. And then 5 years ago, it kind of had its next push, and we'll see if that really happens. But a lot of these technologies probably have their roots in the 70s for a variety of reasons.
It would make sense. So you're intoxicating to talk to, because it's so interesting, the things that are going on. But I really want to segue now, if we can, to Unanimous AI, and for you to talk a little bit about what you're doing there, because there's something in that is just, I find, so beautiful, especially at a time when the world is so fragmented and argumentative. Can you talk a little bit about Unanimous AI?
Sure. So as I mentioned, my interest, my whole career has been on the intersection between people and technology, and how to use technology to allow people to perform better. And for most of my career, I had worked in these technologies of virtual reality, augmented reality, things where the technology is really focused on how it can make a single person's experience in the world different and better and more powerful. But along the way, I started to think about going beyond single individuals to groups of people, and thinking about, can technology allow groups of people to function in really different and interesting and powerful ways. And at the same time, my whole career, I've had a deep interest in artificial intelligence and how intelligence is created, and so this kind of combination of interests between artificial intelligence and how groups of people function caused me to start looking at natural systems that have been looking at intelligence from an evolutionary perspective in a very different way. And as I started looking at natural systems, I learned that there are lots of different species out there that have found ways to become significantly smarter by working together in groups. And biologists refer to this as swarm intelligence. It's the reason why birds flock and fish school and bees swarm. They do this because they can make much better decisions about their lives and about the survival of their species by working together in systems. And it's remarkable. And the more that I learned about how natural systems work, the more I was amazed. And there's honeybees, for example, can make these remarkable decisions that are that allow them to to weigh lots and lots of different options and make selections that certainly a single bee couldn't do, but even a person would have a hard time doing. And biologists refer to that process as they're basically becoming a superorganism. They're thinking together as a superorganism, becoming thousands of times smarter together than any one of the individuals. And so for me, the big question that popped up was, hey, if birds and bees and fish can become so much smarter by thinking together in systems, why can't people do it?
So,
and that was
so pause there a minute. Why hadn't people adapted that? Why is it taken so long? I mean, if you ask anybody on the street, are we more powerful as a group together? They're probably going to say yes. And so what is it that kept the human psyche from discovering what you discovered earlier?
Right. So there's a few things. One, people have known for about 100 years that groups can be smarter than individuals. And there's a field of research called collective intelligence. Some people refer to it as the wisdom of crowds.
Yep.
And it dates back into some experiments and started in, I think, 1906, where there was an English scientist, Francis Galton, who did early experiments showing that if he had a group of farmers in a county fair in England, and he had them estimate individually the weight of an ox. He said, "Here's an ox. Write down on a piece of paper the weight of that ox," and he collected hundreds and hundreds of entries. And what he found was that if he took the average, it was very, very accurate. The average was extremely accurate, whereas the individuals were had widely varying in their estimates of this weight of this ox. And for the last 100 years, people have realized that in this field of collective intelligence, that you can collect input from groups of people, and you can take the average in basically a polling way, and you can get more accurate results. You can see an amplification of intelligence. But it's really been that simple. And in terms of how people have been tapping the intelligence of groups. But when you start looking at natural systems, you realize that what they're doing is really very, very different and actually much, much more sophisticated. And you made the comment that, hey, how come people haven't done this? Well, if you think of, fish and honeybees, these are species that have been around for hundreds of millions of years, and through this long process of evolution have found ways to interact that can optimize how they combine the insights of their groups and reach decisions.
So
Humans, on the other hand,
pause for a minute. So you're saying this is an evolved consciousness in these species, not something they did from day one.
Right. No, the ability of birds and bees and fish to become smarter together by working together in systems. And again, fish, make decisions in a school. When fish are moving around in a school, and biologists would say they're a superorganism. A school of fish is a superorganism. It's moving through the ocean, and it's making decisions about where to go. It essentially has a mind of its own. This school of fish is navigating the ocean and allowing this school to make good decisions about where to go, where to find food, etc. Honeybees, same thing. Swarm of honeybees needs to make complicated decisions about they'll have a hive, they'll outgrow their hive, they'll need to find a new hive to move into. They will send hundreds of scout bees out into the world that will search for information, collect data, finding different potential home sites that they can move into, and so that these hundreds of scout bees will scan the world, come back to the colony, come back to the hive, and then they'll work together as a system. And they actually do it by vibrating their bodies. It's a remarkable thing. Biologists call it a Waggle Dance. And so the bees have all been out there. They've collected information about the world. They've come back. They're vibrating their bodies. And by vibrating their bodies, they're basically negotiating. They're doing this system where they're pushing and pulling against each other, and they're finding the one solution that they can best agree upon. And it's almost always the optimal solution. And again, They
So
evolved over hundreds of millions of years.
okay, so what I'm hearing you say, which is really new data to me that I didn't know before, is that isn't what honeybees did 100 million years ago when they first started to look for a hive. Somehow their process evolved to find a smarter solution to the problems that they encountered. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, so absolutely. So these organisms, whether it's birds or bees or fish, that work together as a swarm intelligence, they evolved that capability over time. And these organisms have been around for a long time compared to people. I mean, it's easy to think that people have been around for forever, but really, in our current form, we've been around for a few 100,000 years. And if you go back just a couple million years, our brains were like 1/3 the size, and we were really a completely different species. And so we've been around from an evolutionary perspective a really short amount of time, whereas birds and bees have been around for forever, and it's comparatively. And so there's a lot we can learn about how those organisms get smarter. Now we humans have done our own remarkable things. We've evolved language, we've evolved technology. I mean, these are things that are cultural evolution, but we've become significantly smarter together because of language and because of technology. But those things really haven't gone to this idea of decision making. And what's most interesting to me is that humans have been around for a few 100,000 years, for a good amount of time, tens of thousands of years. We've had societies, we've had language, we've had very, even simple technology. But the way groups had to make decisions for almost all of that time was based on basically a tribal structure and small tribes, right? I mean, for most of human history, decisions, a full group would be 30 people, whereas now, over an incredibly short amount of time, we've exploded where the number of people who need to make decisions potentially together to impact their society is now, millions or even billions.
Yes.
Whereas we evolved to be able to make good decisions in groups of 10 to 20, and even then it was a tribal structure, and it was really the culture, tribal culture, that allowed those decisions to get made. We've lost that, whatever cultural abilities we had to make those types of decisions 10,000 years ago is gone. We now have this new society that's changed and evolved very, very quickly. Our groups are much, much larger, whether it's a corporation of thousands of people or a country of millions or the world of billions. The bigger the group, the harder it is for us to make decisions, and the harder it is for us to make decisions that are in the best interest of ourselves. Yes. And that's, my view is that's why we get into these problems like global warming, right? Yeah. We are not, I think everybody realizes that it's not in our best interest to damage the environment, and yet as a species we make decisions that are hurting us.
Yes.
And it's because we didn't develop to create to answer questions, make decisions that impact billions of us.
Well, it seems like we've actually developed and stayed true to the belief that we had, which was I call it a vertical reality, where there is a leader and someone who says, I've listened to the council and this is my decision. Or I've gone out and I have the authority to make the decision. And we've always followed. We're like a group. We've developed a group mentality, but we haven't developed a swarm mentality. And it's so much of a new model that I'm sort of surprised listening to you, even though I've listened to you 10 times on, or 1,000, 100 times on the internet. And But to have this idea never coming to hold, that a group can make decisions as a group without having a vote or a leader, but just following the wisdom of the crowd, or the hive mentality, or the what I would call the mosaic mind, the unified mind, that a billion minds can become one mind when you're given the opportunity to operate that without a vertical reality of people trying to fix them. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. So, this idea of hierarchy, which is, when we evolved in tribes or troops, or, as, looking even to like troops of apes or monkeys, it's a strict hierarchy,
Yeah.
and there is a decision maker in that hierarchy, and but the group is small enough that the decision maker, can understand the input and the perspectives of the group, and if the decision maker is not doing a good job, then the others can remove that
Right.
that person and replace them, and so that potentially work, especially when there, if you were a human tribe out in the wilderness, your whole world was your tribe. You might never encounter another one and another tribe, and if you did, it was rare, and so decisions were very, very small scale. This idea of hierarchy becomes harder when the groups get larger and larger, and we as a human society decided at some point, hey, instead of this strict hierarchy, instead of a dictatorship or a monarchy, what about democracy? And democracy is this idea that, hey, the group can make the decision. And the thing is, the best solution that we came up with for democracy was basically voting, which is everybody gets a vote, and you're gonna and if you take a group of people, whether it's 100 people or 1 million people or 300 million people, if they vote, they'll come up with good decisions. And that's an assumption that we're all making, that, hey, voting, is voting really the best way to capture the knowledge and wisdom and insight of a population? It seems like it might be a good way to do it, but again, when you start looking at how natural species do it, that have been looking at this for hundreds of millions of years. If you look at, bees, a colony of 10,000 bees, they don't take a vote.
Right.
If you look at a school of fish making these decisions, they don't take a vote. If you look at a flock of birds, they don't take a vote. What they do is they form a system. So a vote is each individual gives a piece of data that goes into a voting machine or a pollster's response, and somebody, finds a statistical average, and they tell you the answer. A system is where the group is actually all interacting together. They're basically pushing and pulling against each other to make a decision. And so the thing that really was the focus of unanimous AI, and the reason that I was interested in this idea of swarms, was to say, hey, is there something better than taking a vote or a poll or a survey? Can we make groups of people smarter by allowing them to interact as a system and converge together on answers, on solutions, the way birds and bees and fish do? And again, it just started with this idea that, hey, nature says this should be better than taking a vote or a poll or a survey. Let's try it. And as soon as we tried it, and we built a system that allowed people to connect together, we discovered that it works. We can make groups of people significantly smarter, whether they're making better forecasts, better predictions, or better decisions, better prioritizations, better estimations. They can become significantly smarter together by working together as a swarm, as a system, as compared to the alternatives, which is to just have, a hierarchy where one person makes the decision, or to take a vote. And again, taking a vote is the reasonable first step that people took to say, how can we tap the intelligence of a population? Let's take a vote. That's a reasonable first step. But again, if we look to nature, it would say, hey, there's something better than taking a vote. It's forming this real-time swarm. And again, if you go back 200 years, nobody could ever have considered forming a swarm because we didn't evolve the ability to do it, and we didn't have technology that would allow us to do it. But then if you jump forward, to the last, couple decades, suddenly we as humans have put computers in everybody's hands and in everybody's pocket, and we've put satellites in orbit, and we connected people together so that they can actually all interact in real time. And you can almost think that's our high-speed evolution.
Yeah.
Like we've evolved, in the last 20 years in this very interesting way, where we've connected everybody together with satellites, computers in their pockets. We've suddenly given the ability of groups of people to connect, not by taking a simple vote, but by forming a system. We can do it. Does it work? And the work that I've been doing and the other folks at Unanimous AI says that it actually works really, really well. You can make groups of people significantly smarter by connecting them together, and they can, whether they're a business team trying to make a better forecast, or a nonprofit organization trying to make a decision that's better for the world, they can converge on better solutions the way natural systems do, than by taking votes or polls or doing it the way that people have been doing it.
I so am in love with this system, and I don't even think you know to the extent to which I would like to be involved with you. But I just want to take a couple of minutes and just sort of share with people that are listening and share with you. I woke up one morning with this thought of, how do we really end suffering? How is it possible we're about to colonize another planet? We're about to put people on the moon, and we haven't figured out how to feed people, and how to give people homes, and how to take care of people's medical, and how to educate, and how to have clean drinking water, and how to get people out of the human trafficking business and racism and just all those types of things. And the thought came to me, without even knowing that you existed, the thought came to me of, how would it be possible to resource people together, to take the smartest minds in the world and the simplest minds in the world, those people that are solving solutions in the boardroom, and those people that are the solutions happening on the streets, by pushing the broom and cleaning the floors, by stocking the food, by growing the food, all of those people, and put their minds together to create possibilities of how we could do that. And then when I discovered you and the work that you're doing, and I found out that this swarm, it just resonated so deeply that this is the modality that we could bring people into these rooms to come up with ideas. And what I want to do is I want to create virtual rooms that people can come into, and we've talked about this, and real life places where people could come, and we have to overcome the bias of the real life place, as you brought out, to find the data of what we would put into the swarm. And what I want to do is I want to create something called that damn club. It's the $1 a month club. Everybody that would be a part of this would donate $1 a month. The idea is to make it affordable for every human being that exists. And if people can't afford it because they don't have $1 or they only make $1 a month, we'll find people that pay $2 a month to sponsor them. But the idea is to grow that to 1 billion people, and to have $1 billion a month that we can now invest in the solutions that we, the people, come up with for the problems that we, the people, want to solve. And even if we make a few mistakes, and even if we go a few months, 6 months, 3 months, whatever, and we lose $6 billion, all any of us individually have lost is $1. And so it feels like it's worth the investment and the time to try and allow this intelligence that you've created to literally alter the way the world operates. I can only imagine government being led by swarm rather than political parties. I can only imagine solutions coming to the field of medical, the field of education, the field of homelessness, the field of hunger, by us coming together to find new solutions. Because one of the things that I think we found, and that you found, that I repeat, I hope I'm repeating it correctly, is that oftentimes the decision the group makes is not the decision any individual would make. And so the group mind is by and large way more intelligent than any solo mind. And those solo minds have been what's been leading our vertical reality of people leading other people without really knowing solutions. So I am so intoxicated with this idea. And I believe, like Buckminster Fuller said, you can't change the problems of the old paradigm with thinking of the old paradigm. You have to create a new paradigm that makes the old paradigm obsolete. And I've been sitting here just like biting my tongue, not wanting to say anything, because I just want people to hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak. But I believe this is the new paradigm that will change, that will disrupt the old paradigm and will make the old paradigm obsolete. Am I wrong in what I'm saying, or am I off in what I'm saying? Am I misguided, or is there some truth to this?
I think there's a lot of truth to it. I mean, again, I started in this area from really just a hunch that, hey, if natural systems like birds and bees and fish can really get so much smarter together, and again, the types of decisions that these other organisms are making, they're life or death decisions. They're, that's how they do politics, right? They're making decisions for their whole colony, for their whole school, that are in the best interests of their population for survival. And so high stakes decisions, that's how evolution determined an optimal way to do it. And it didn't determine it, evolution didn't reach that conclusion once. It reached it again and again and again in totally different organisms using different mechanisms. Even slime molds use swarm intelligence to navigate their world in optimal ways. And so again, started from this hunch that hey, it works for all these other species. It should work for us humans. We now have the technology to actually make that a reality. And again, we've done lots and lots of research to really test this, because again, it was just a hunch. And the question was, can we rigorously test that groups of people can get smarter and make better decisions? And every time we run an experiment, and we do lots of work with different universities. We have research grants with Stanford University, where here's an example. We just published a study with Stanford University where they had groups of medical doctors make diagnoses either as individuals or as a swarm. And what they found was that when the groups of doctors made decisions as a swarm, they reduced their errors by over 30%. Wow. We had another research project with the U.S. Army that just looks at prioritizing risks. So this is like cyber risks, and you have groups of people who need to look at these different cyber risks and prioritize them in an optimal way. And they can either do it by sitting around a table arguing, or they can use a swarm. And we found that when they do it as a swarm, they get a better result, and they do it much faster than when they do it the old-fashioned way. We had a study with researchers at Oxford University that looked at financial analysts to say, hey, can they predict things like the stock market, things like the price of oil, price of gold? Can they do that better as a swarm versus individuals? And what the Oxford study showed, that people were over 25% more accurate when predicting financial things as a swarm as compared to if they just took a vote or they just decided as individuals. And those are kind of, in some sense, simple forecasting examples, but we also look at things like political decisions, and we find that when groups of people need to prioritize political issues and to come up with what are the most important issues in a way that is most satisfying to the whole population, they can either do that by decree, or they could do that by taking a vote, or they can do that by swarm. And when we look at swarm, we see that groups come up with prioritizations that are the most satisfactory to the whole population. It is a really good way for groups of people, especially groups of people with conflicting views, right? Because if everyone has the same view, it's very easy to reach a decision, right? It's when groups of people have conflicting views. And what we find is that a swarm of people, if they have conflicting views, can converge on solutions that satisfy that population significantly better than if they had just taken a vote. And so, your point about, hey, could this be a way for groups of people to either govern or just to guide political or governmental decision making? And I think it could, and it should. I think that
it will. I think it will, because that's what I honestly believe. So we're winding down, and I think I'm already over my time that you gave me. But I want to make sure we get to something that we spoke about earlier, because you've worked with a lot of big organizations, and I'm sure the price tag for that is not small. But you're coming up with some new technology now that's going to allow this swarm intelligence to be experienced by a wider group of people. Can you talk a little bit about that before we close up?
Sure. So we've been developing this technology called Swarm AI for the last 5 years, and over the last few years, we've been working with large corporations, Fortune 500 companies, some of the largest banks in the world, some of the largest food companies in the world, to do custom projects for them where they can build a swarm intelligence and make smart decisions and predictions and forecasts. And while that's been great and we've seen really powerful results, we believe that this is a technology that really should be accessible to every organization, not just big organizations that can pay a lot for a custom project. And so just last month we launched a beta release of a software platform that we call Swarm, that is intended to be self-serve, low cost, where any organization can log in, get a subscription, and then amplify the intelligence of groups themselves. And it could be that they're amplifying the intelligence of an internal group, whether it's their own business team, sales team, marketing team, engineering team, or it could be that they're amplifying the intelligence of external groups, whether it's groups of customers or if it's political groups of constituents. And so again, our reason for launching the Swarm platform, which people can find at just swarm.ai, is to make it accessible and cost effective enough that any group, whether it's a political group, nonprofit group, or a company of any size, can benefit from this power of amplifying the intelligence of groups. And in fact, right now we allow people a 14-day free trial, so they can actually just try it. If they have a group of people that they want to come in and make decisions or make forecasts or make predictions, they can do it, and they can discover for themselves that their group can and will be significantly smarter together than they would have been making these decisions or forecasts some other way.
So who would have thought that song that was popular way, way back? Birds do it, bees do it, right? I mean, that we would be led by the whole beauty of this thing. To me, is that it has taken some of the species of lesser intelligence by a long shot, and it has highlighted what they've done to become more intelligent than they could ever be on their own. And so given that technology put into the hands of people that are already semi-intelligent, what would be possible? And so if anybody's listening to this and does not and wants to give it a try, you've got to go to swarm.ai, swarmai.com or swarm.ai.
Swarm.ai.
Swarm.ai. And we'll list that in the show notes for sure. But give it a try. You have 14 days to see what your team can do and test it. But for me, I want to see, when the Constitution first started out with the first 3 words that said, "We the people," we haven't been we the people for a long time. To allow we the people the option and the chance to create solutions to the problems that we help to create. There's some sort of beautiful karmic finality to that we could come together without government organizations or charities or other groups to resource our ability to find solutions to our problems. And the beautiful thing to me is that it starts with bees and birds, which are not the most intelligent species. So that means even humans of all intelligence can come together to do this. And our values, our beliefs and our opinions of every single person in the world are valuable. And I want to help to create this reality in the world where, in my mind, we operate like a mosaic. No more vertical realities of people telling us what to do, but the mosaic, all the pieces show up and just nudge each other and connect with each other. And in that, we create something far more beautiful than any piece could ever have. This is, Louis, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work you're doing. I feel like this is one of those moments that we're on the edge of something that will literally change the world. And I believe that I'd love to talk with you more. I'd love to have you on again. I'd love to have people get in touch with you. How can people learn more about it? We've already talked about swarm.ai. Where is that the best place for people to go, or is there a better place for people to go?
So our company is called Unanimous AI, and so if you go to unanimous.ai, then there's information about the company, but there's including all the different research studies that we've done. We have on our website, dozens of academic papers that have been published about the power of groups coming together as swarms. There's also case studies and other information, and so unanimous.ai is a good place to just learn a lot more about this idea of swarm intelligence and the power of connecting people together in swarms, whether it be for business applications or political applications. And just one comment to make, listening to what you just said before.
Yeah.
This idea of getting groups of people together, regular people together to make decisions about things that life or death decisions that impact the future of society, the future of humanity. We can learn a lot from birds and bees, even though they're simpler organisms than people. What they don't do is, and biologists study them all the time, they have life or death decisions to make. They don't fall into gridlock. Yeah. They don't entrench. They don't get into the same kinds of problems that we humans, who are apparently so much smarter, get into. If a colony of honeybees needs to decide they're going to move the hive from one place to another, and they're trying to decide among 3 different potential locations, they don't fall into gridlock and entrench and refuse to take action. They actually will reach a decision. Doesn't mean that they don't have conflict. They do. They have different views of their world. But the thing about a natural swarm is that it actually amplifies the places where the group can agree. Yes. Whereas we humans have fallen into this other tool that we call a poll. And a poll is really it's the foundation of how politics are driven right now in democracies. And a poll is polarizing. That's what it is. A poll will take a population. It will show the population where they disagree. It will actually then strengthen the disagreement. It actually drives entrenchment, and it doesn't do anything to point out where the group actually agrees. Nature went the other direction. Nature uses a swarm because it points out actually where the group agrees. It actually highlights the agreements, not the disagreements, and it actually facilitates the group coming to the solution that they can best agree upon. And so, again, I agree with you that humans are definitely more sophisticated than birds and bees, but if they were looking at how we make decisions, they would be surprised about the entrenchment and gridlock problems that we face.
I couldn't agree more. And so the other thing that I think, I don't know if you have in the working already, but that I would love, I come from a publishing background. Do you have a book? Is there some way people can read about this? Is it not enough time for that? You're just moving so quickly. Is there a book about what you're doing out there?
There's not a book. I mean, we have on our website, we have a white paper called Swarm Intelligence, which goes through the basic ideas of swarm intelligence and summarizes a bunch of the recent research. We have some videos. As you mentioned, I gave a TED talk about swarm intelligence that gives people a sense of the kind of the big picture. Those are the materials that are best right now.
I would love to help get a book out there down the line, just planting that seed, because I really see this as the future of decision making, both in huge issues and in small issues. And I think that the work that you've done is going to revolutionize the world that we live in. So with that, I can't thank you enough for all of your time. I can't thank you enough for all the work that you've done. I look forward to this being the beginning. And for those of you who are interested, all the information will be in the show notes below once we come out with the show and publish the podcast. But this is something you have to start researching. And if you're listening now, you just got to go to unanimous.ai right now and start reading up on it. And go to his TED Talk. It's Dr. Louis Rosenberg, the TED Talk. And it's called The Power of Hive Mind. Is that what it's called?
It's the title of the talk is New Hope for Humans in an AI World. And it goes at this idea that we could use AI to make us smarter together, as opposed to replacing us, which is what a lot of AI work is doing right now.
Yes, and I love that this is a blend of human consciousness and human mind and AI mind working together to enrich each other, because so many people in the AI world are fearful that whatever AI we create or give power to is going to overpower us. That's not what's happening here. So I encourage you to get more information. Louis, you feel it in every fiber of my cell, how thankful I am for you being here with us and how thankful I am for the work you're doing. Again, thank you so very, very much. It's an honor to have you on the show.
No, thanks for having me. It was definitely fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope you'll come back more so we can just continue to grow this and do it more together. And I look forward to working with you sometime in the very near future.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you again. And everybody, that wraps up this episode of the Mosaic Podcast. We look forward to seeing you in the future, and stay in touch. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.